A week ago, we received a brand new gameplay trailer for Armored Core 6. I already did a video reaction and analysis of that trailer. Naturally, that trailer provided us with a lot of new information for Armored Core 6, as well as quite a bit of gameplay footage, which was completely phenomenal. I really enjoyed what that trailer looked like. I liked the gameplay, I liked the animations, I liked the explosions. I even liked the implications for the story that were talked about in that trailer. Like, there's just a lot of stuff to go over, and I already kind of just did my trailer analysis, but today we're going to be marrying that analysis with a lot more information that was also posted that day, because there was also an article over on Eurogamer, there was an article on PlayStation Blog, and there was another article on the official Xbox website. And on top of that, there was also an IGN interview, and in today's video I'm going to be collating all of that information. I have some excerpts that I've grabbed from each of those websites, which naturally I will be crediting, and I'm going to be reading those for you and telling you my opinions on the stuff that was said. In these articles, there are two members of the From Software team that are also talking to the people in question, and those members are Yasunori Ogura, who is the producer of Armored Core 6, as well as Masaru Yamamura, who is the director. These two individuals have been involved in multiple From Software projects in the past, so they do know what they're talking about. So, let's begin. I kind of tried tailoring this video across a couple of different sections. So the first section is going to be, what is the Armored Core 6 experience? Then we're going to be talking about specifically the Armored Core 6 assembly mode, which is kind of like where you go to do your builds and do all of that stuff and plan out how you're going to build out your mech and all of these things. Then we're going to be going for the gameplay experience, where I'm going to be focusing specifically on gameplay mechanics. And then at the very end of the video, we're going to be talking about the story, because naturally I know that a lot of people want to go completely unspoiled, and you don't even want to know what my personal speculation is on the story, because in the story bit of the video is where I'm going to grab the things that we already know, and I'm going to try and extrapolate a couple of things from that information and from my experience with From Software games in the past. So let's get started by trying to define what the Armored Core 6 experience is going to be like. And for that, I have a quote here from Masaru Yamamura, which was in the Eurogamer interview. And here's what he has to say. While the base format of the Armored Core games in Armored Core 6 is very different from that of the Soul series in games like Sekiro, we have tried to incorporate some of that design philosophy in our experience over the last several years. I'd say some of that is definitely present in the aggressiveness of combat in Armored Core 6. We wanted to make something that was very visceral, very aggressive, and has a very clear and distinct rhythm or tempo to the combat. We want players to feel those highs and lows, fighting at a near distance and far distance. So naturally, the director here is mentioning that they are going to be using what they have learned from previous titles like Sekiro and the Soul series and all of that stuff. But I still feel that it's important for people to understand that even though they're using those experiences, it doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, the game's going to feel like Sekiro. No, you're not going to be with your mech walking up to another mech and then spamming L1 to start parrying attacks. That's not going to be what you're going to be doing. They're talking specifically about kind of like the momentum and the visceral aspects of it. They're referring to something that we're going to be talking later when it comes to the gameplay, which most likely is the stagger mechanic. There's going to be a mechanic where you will be able to kind of like overload a certain aspect of an enemy's mech that is going to be sending them reeling, and that is probably going to open them up to do some, special attacks. Like you kind of even see in the trailer, there's like this attack with a lance that he does where he kind of like pierces the other mech with a lance and just like pushes him around. I think it's going to be something more in line with that, but even then, it's not necessarily going to feel like a visceral attack or something of that nature. At least that's what I would imagine, considering that this is a mech game and it is supposed to feel like its own thing. And, especially with the conversations that we've had with Fighting Cowboy in the past, like he also doesn't believe that that is going to be the case. So again, it's taking that experience, but translating it into something that you would expect to see in Armored Core 6. So be very careful when we're trying to have these discussions about, is it going to be like a Souls game? Is it not going to be like a Souls game? Let's put it like this. Just because you like Sekiro and Dark Souls and Bloodborne and all of these things does not necessarily mean that you're going to enjoy Armored Core. I still highly recommend, because, you know, the little that I've played of Armored Core, I greatly enjoyed it, but it does not necessarily translate one-to-one, so keep that in mind. Now, another thing that they talk about in that same interview is the team has eschewed some elements from previous game as part of this fresh start for the series. For instance, the first game included a debt system whereby players would lose money each time a mission was failed. More recently, Armored Core 5 experimented with an online world. For Armored Core 6, both of these are out. So do not expect to have like a co-op experience like you were able to do with Armored Core 5, and do not expect to be losing money every time a mission was failed, but there are limitations as to how you will be handling these missions from some of the other quotes that I've seen here. As a reboot, we wanted to recall the best parts of Armored Core and really what made that series special. This is again a quote from Yamamura-san. We felt like focusing on those single-player elements and designing a challenging and exciting game that taps into our various areas of game philosophy and battle design. This is something that we had to leverage towards single-player first and foremost. So again, Armored Core 6 is going to be first and foremost a single-player experience. Now, I was actually hoping there would be co-op because I really enjoyed the co-op aspects of Armored Core 5. I understand that, you know, probably Armored Core fans that have played the series throughout the years might have different feelings towards that, but I'm just really big into co-op. But you know, the fact that it is mostly focused on single player is not necessarily something that is a big downside to me, let's put it like that. And rather than a debt or death penalty as the Soulsborne games play with, players are free to repeatedly attempt missions, but with subtractions and detriments to the compensation that they receive and to their reward as they complete objectives. Again, this is Yamamura speaking. The mission structure, rather than an open world and retry points, allow players to experiment with their mech build, with optimizing their playstyle being a key incentive to progress. So the idea here appears to be you're going to be able to repeat missions as much as you want. Okay, you can keep repeating the missions, but once you actually complete objectives within those missions, which, you know, you'll probably get very specific rewards for completing those objectives, you're not going to be able to get those rewards again. So it's like if a certain quest, if a certain mission would, you know, reward you with a high amount of whatever is the equivalent of credits in this game, you're probably not going to be able to just like spam that mission, but you can use it to practice different mech builds. So say you find like, oh, I want to optimize a build to deal with this specific type of enemy, then you can go back into the mission and be like, okay, let's try out some reverse jointed legs. Okay, these didn't work very well. Let's try out some tank threads. Let's see how that works out. Oh, let's try out a missile launcher, or, you know, let's try out the laser lance. Basically get to tweak out your build and retry those missions over and over to see what feels better for your particular mech build. Next, I have something here from the PlayStation blog, and what they said is that we asked Yamamura about how the pace and feel of the game compares to previous entries, which is something that the community has been talking about quite a bit when it comes to Armored Core 6. Now, I never played Armored Core 4 Answer. I know that a lot of people are like, oh, 4 Answer is like super fast. The one that I played was Armored Core 5, and I know that that one was much slower, and there's actually a lot of people apparently in the Armored Core fandom that didn't really appreciate Armored Core 5. I liked it. It's the one that I played because I got into the console game very, very late. But for a lot of people, Armored Core 4 is like the ideal, right? Anyway, the answer here was the average movement speed across the game is somewhat between Armored Core 3 and Armored Core 5. But Armored Core 6 has been developed to bolster the changes of tempo in combat with instantaneous bursts of speed and sudden changes of tempo. Combat can often reach the dizzying heights of, say, Armored Core 4. So what they're trying to do here is like, look, if you really optimize your mech, you can get to the levels of speed that you had in Armored Core 4, but that's not the default, which to me, I think that that is potentially one of the better solutions. Instead of having every mech zipping around like it's on cocaine, you actually get to choose, no, I want to build something a little bit more heavy duty, and naturally the heavy duty mech is not going to be going crazy. Or I want to build something like that super light, super fast, and I want to reach that tempo that you got in Armored Core 4. You can do that too, but most likely I would imagine there will be drawbacks because they'll want to be balancing that stuff to the point where it's like, hey, you're playing a super fast mech, okay, you're going to be doing a lot of damage doing all of these things, but naturally, if you get hit, you're going to feel it a lot more than someone who is building a much heavier mech, right? That's at least what I would expect when it comes to that stuff. And this particular part of our video actually segues really nicely into the next one, which is Armored Core 6 Assembly, which this is basically where you go to customize your mech. I called this section also builds and customization, but there's also a couple of comments when it comes to the difficulty that you can expect in Armored Core 6. So this next quote comes from the official Xbox website, and it is by, once again, Yamamura. And here's what he had to say. In our approach to difficulty, let's say, for example, that a certain boss is giving you trouble with a devastating laser attack that sweeps across the battle arena, and it's very hard to avoid. One possible solution in such a situation could be to go back to the assembly and reconfigure your mech with reverse-jointed legs, which have excellent jumping ability. Or a booster with a powerful upward thrust so the attack can be evaded vertically. An alternative approach could also be to use a high-impact weapon like a bazooka to stop the enemy's movement or before it attacks. It's in this way that Yamamura is hoping players will enjoy using their ingenuity and creativity, both in terms of observing the enemy and their attack patterns, but also creating their own solutions with the game's assembly system to tackle these various threats across these intricately detailed maps. And I gotta say, my favorite solution to this problem is use a high-impact weapon like a bazooka to stop the enemy's movement before it even attacks. See, that's the way to do it. Enemy's got a big, devastating laser that is destroying everything. Blow him up. Just blow him up before he gets to use the laser. Now, I'm assuming this is not going to be an easy thing, and potentially, just equipping a big-ass bazooka to smash an enemy mech before he even does a big attack is probably going to have some implications. But the idea here is going to be you're going to jump into a mission and potentially you're going to fail. And at that point, you might be considering, ooh, what can I change here? Because much more than in Souls games and all of that stuff, and I'm just using Souls games as a comparison because it's going to be something that a lot of people are going to be thinking about when it comes to From Software, right? Very much unlike in Souls games where you're thinking in terms of like, oh, I'm going to upgrade this weapon, and then you're kind of like going down a certain path because there's a limited amount of weapons that you can realistically upgrade when it comes to a Souls game within, I mean, technically speaking, you can just go farm shards for days, but that's not going to be something that everybody's going to be willing to do. So there's going to be a limited number of weapons that you're going to be going down a set path, right? And you usually try to pick one or two that will allow you to deal with different situations depending on what your build is capable of. Sometimes you'll even just focus on one weapon or whatever, and you're kind of just like going down that path, and that's what you got. In here, it is going to be a lot more about you analyzing the situation and changing things around. And this is something that they're making sure that they're doubling down on to avoid a situation where players are like, well, but I'm used to this thing and I don't want to swap it. And, it is what it is. And it's like, okay, then you get to die repeatedly until you change your build and do something different. Like, a lot of players, an example of this would be actually Monster Hunter. And again, I'm not comparing these two games. I don't want to bring that into this. Armored Core, it's its own thing. But in Monster Hunter, an example of this would have been the Altreon thing where people were like, oh, I don't want to equip an elemental weapon. Okay, die then. There you go. That's going to be what is going to be expected of you. If you do not adapt to deal with the situations that are presented in front of you, then you're going to die. It's that simple. Now, there was also, like I mentioned, an IGN interview, and in that interview, they specifically mentioned the combo that we saw in the first trailer. This is the first cinematic trailer, where if you guys remember, there's an Armored Core that, like, deploys its core and generates, like, a shockwave thing. There's, like, this animation of, like, these tendril-looking things clanking on, and electricity comes out, boom, shockwave, and then it feels like the other mech gets staggered. And then he moves in for the kill with the pile bunker. You guys might remember that scene. And he mentions that is, by he, I'm talking about Yasunori Ogura. He mentions that he expects players to come up with their own combinations of these types of things in the assembly. So they'll want you to experiment what works well. Like maybe you'll use a submachine gun to close in the distance. Then when you're closing in, you'll use like assault boost, which is something that we're going to be talking about a little bit further in the video. And you'll, engage on the other mech in melee combat, something like that. But basically the idea is get combinations of weapons that work well together and try to generate these organic combos that you can do, which is something that is mentioned quite a bit in that IGN interview. Then once again, Masaru Yamamura mentions this in the Xbox website. The main thing we focused on in Armored Core 6 was to make sure that this customization element is not just about parameters going up and down and numerical values. We want to reflect these changes in customization in the way the game and action feel as much as possible. And this is something that I am incredibly thankful for. I get tired of video games just basically being like, hey, it's a numbers game. You equip this weapon, number goes higher. The whole gear score thing that we tend to have in a lot of games these days. You equip this weapon, your number goes higher, you're more powerful. And here, at least from what Yamamura is saying here, is that the idea is that no, you're going to equip reverse jointed legs, now you jump higher, or according to what we see in the trailer, you have this special kick attack, or you're going to equip the coolest legs that you possibly can that we saw in that trailer, which, let's be honest, there is a right answer to what is the coolest legs that you see in that trailer, and it's goddamn tank threads. You see the tank threads just like rolling over all of those enemies? Dude, that section of the trailer was amazing, dude. I friggin' loved it. Just like charges through, blows up a bunch of dudes, then drifts like he's in friggin' Tokyo Drift. Yes, that is the one that I want to be playing with. But anyways, the idea is that depending on the legs that you equip, they'll want those to feel special. So for instance, like we already talked about, reverse jointed legs are going to be better for jumping. On the other hand, the quadrupedal legs that were shown in the trailer appear to be better for like hovering around. You can actually see one of the mechs just like hovering around with the quadrupedal legs and just fire raining death from above, right? And then the tank threads are good for like drifting and doing all of this stuff. And the bipedal legs are probably going to have their own specialty, which has probably already been reflected in previous Armored Core games. You guys get the idea, but the gist of it is they want these things to feel different. Now again, he continues. For example, you obviously have the head, core, arms, and leg parts of the Armored Core. The leg parts in particular control the mech's movement, and so these will change the basic behavior of the AC depending on what type they are. This is what I was talking about. Like tank-type legs will be able to perform drift turns. Weapons will differ in terms of how they fire, how much recoil they have, and how the projectiles behave. So, again, weapons also included in this thing that I was talking about. And how we've been conscious of how this all affects the game and feel and individuality of different builds, which is good. I'm hoping that these builds actually feel different, and I'm hoping that it takes people quite a long time to establish a meta. And if possible at all, I would rather a meta not even be established. That would be the dream. It's like every build has its weak points, and, you're going to have to fiddle around to actually find the one that best suits you. And that has me very, very excited, because that's one of the things that I love doing when it comes to games that allow you to really customize. I was going to say your character, but in this case, it's going to be your mech. I love fiddling around with it and changing things around and going like, okay, I want this thing, I want that thing. The big thing here is going to be how hard is it going to be for you to grind for these different parts, because some of the parts are going to be purchased, some of the parts are probably going to be unlocked by doing certain missions. How hard is it going to be to gain access to these parts, and how prohibitive is it going to be to just swap them around whenever you feel like, which as far as I'm aware, I think you're supposed to be able to just freely swap everything around. So that is going to be good stuff. So now let's talk about Armored Core 6's gameplay experience, the specifics that were revealed in some of these interviews and whatnot. And I'm going to be starting us off with something from the PlayStation blog. There'll be a rich variety of powerful enemies of all shapes and sizes, says Yamamura. Huge combat helicopters, heavily armored mobile turrets, and unmanned heavy demolition machinery that's programmed to indiscriminately crush intruders. Armored Core 6 will offer a number of explosive battle experiences that challenge players to fight against the odds and overcome these ginormous, more abnormal mechs. And this is a very interesting use of that word, abnormal mechs. I'm going to be coming back to this when we get to the story discussion. Now, in here, they talk about specific things that they're implementing in this game. One of those is Assault Boost. Assault Boost is an offensive action that helps close the gap between enemies and lets you quickly go from long distance to close range, Yamamura tells us. It will also provide some incredible chain abilities when fighting, as he describes vividly. Say you activate Assault Boost to make your approach while using machine gun fire and a missile salvo to stagger the enemy, then use your Pulse Blade to score a direct melee hit once you're up close. And I think that one of the interesting things that is provided in this sentence is incredible chain abilities, which almost makes it sound like these combos are going to be potentially something that is a little bit more integrated than simply, oh, I pelt him with machine guns, then hit him with the melee weapon and it's whatever. But it seems like you might actually be able to chain certain abilities together. They might be more, by abilities, I mean like you might be able to get some type of like weapon selection, or, you know, weapons plus arms plus legs plus whatever that might be a little bit more synergistic in nature, and that could be something that is going to be particularly important. Again, I'm not sitting here trying to claim that I'm an Armored Core expert, okay? This is just me like speculating on what could potentially be. But whatever it is going to be, whatever implementation they end up doing with this, the sound of it at this point sounds incredibly appealing to someone like me personally. Then they talk about the stagger mechanic, where they say this is another addition to the series. Combat is a stagger element. If an armored core takes too many hits over a short period of time, its attitude control system will be overloaded, making it vulnerable for a short time. Both continuous hits and big powerful strikes will cause stagger damage, encouraging you to keep up the pressure on the opponent. The weapon inflicted to an enemy stagger gauge varies. The damage inflicted to an enemy stagger gauge varies from weapon to weapon. It can also be affected by factors like distance, adding additional strategy in equipping and using these armaments in combat. Now, what I see here is that certain weapons will be more effective at close range, certain weapons will be more effective at long range, and that is going to have an effect on the enemy stagger gauge. So say, for instance, if you're using something, a weapon that is supposed to function kind of like a shotgun, and you're trying to use it from the distance of a sniper rifle, even if the buckshot hits the other mech, it's probably not going to be particularly effective. So, especially when it comes to the stagger gauge, so you're going to be wanting to use specific weapons at specific ranges in order to take full advantage of the stagger thing. But it does almost sound like the stagger thing. The more you speak about it, it does almost sound like when you get like a posture break or a parry in Bloodborne or something like that. I don't want to make that comparison, but if you look at the lance attack that you see in the trailer, there's definitely a lot of parallels that you can draw there. But yeah, these are most of the things that we got in terms of gameplay, and naturally if you look at the trailer, you get to see the pace of the gameplay and all of that stuff. I have a bit of a summary here of some of the things that were talked about in terms of gameplay. There's going to be a variety of mission types, strategic boss encounters, battles against numerous small enemies, and large-scale fights against massive threats. There's going to be intricate 3D map design. This is something that they emphasize a lot as well throughout these interviews. Emphasis on player creativity and ingenuity in overcoming obstacles, which again, you're going to be wanting to build a mech that can navigate the maps in certain ways, and maybe different legs, for instance, are going to be much better in certain maps than others. They say that not every mission is going to be brutally difficult. They say that variety is an essential aspect of the series, which is something that, if you think back to what we just talked about earlier, they have this strategic boss encounters, numerous small enemy battles, and large-scale fights against massive threats. All of these are going to have varying difficulty, and again, you have to adapt to what the mission is expecting of you if you want to have like a good experience with the difficulty of the game. Dynamic battles with different mech parts affecting movement and combat. We already talked about this. Side objectives, data collection and wreckage scanning to uncover new information and parts. Remember how we saw that mech kind of just like, you know, he was at, this was in the cinematic trailer. There was like a mech that almost looked like he was scavenging parts and stuff like that. You know, while I don't think that we're going to be running around with an armored core scavenging things, there are going to be missions of data collection and wreckage scanning, and that is going to uncover new information and parts for your mechs. Exploration aspects, piloting armored cores through vast, intricately crafted megastructures and post-apocalyptic landscapes. The gameplay is going to focus on observing enemy movements and dealing with them accordingly using creativity and ingenuity. Again, something that we already talked about. Different leg parts change the basic behavior of the mech, and weapons differ in terms of firing, recoil, and projectile behavior, affecting the feel and individuality of different builds. It's just like a little bit of a summary that I had here to provide to you guys. And now we're going to get into what we know so far about the story of Armored Core 6. So if you do not want to hear about the story, and again, you know, this is just stuff that was talked about in trailers and in the interviews, and then I'm going to be speculating on it, okay? So one of the first things is, you might be wondering, this is Armored Core 6. Do I need to play the previous Armored Core games in order to understand what is happening on this one? No, there's no direct link to previous titles. This was clarified on the IGN interview, and I believe that there were probably other articles where they talked about you do not have to play previous Armored Core games. You can jump straight into this one. It is going to be an original story that has no links to the previous games. There's probably going to be like some Easter eggs or something like that. That is what I would expect, but that is pretty much it. So, the description that we have on the story so far is it takes place on the planet of Rubicon following a cosmic catastrophe that engulfed the planet in a fiery apocalypse. Years later, Rubicon is encased in a huge constructed shell where multiple factions and corporations fight for control over coral, which is a rare material found only on this planet. Now, further clarifications, I believe that this one was something that I got from Eurogamer. I forgot the note where I specifically took this quote. Just remember, this stuff is coming from both Eurogamer, the official Xbox website, as well as the PlayStation blog. But on the IGN interview, one of the things that I thought was interesting is that they clarified, instead of calling it just the planet of Rubicon, they call it Rubicon 3. Not sure what implications that might have, or if that is something that maybe they were calling it in an earlier build, now they just call it Rubicon, but they call it Rubicon 3. Could there be other planets? Could we be going to other different planets even? Who knows? Anyway, it seems like most of the action is taking place in Rubicon, but it wouldn't surprise me if we actually go off planet at some point. They say that the game takes place 50 years after the catastrophe. So this fiery apocalypse that we're talking about, it happened, and then 50 years pass, and that is when the game begins. It was thought that coral was lost, but it's since been rediscovered. And now this next part is something that makes me wonder if there might be some translation mishaps or something like that on the IGN interview, because what Yasunori said is that there are extraterrestrial corporate forces that are invading Rubicon to take coral from the natives. So there's supposedly like a native population in Rubicon, and there's an extraterrestrial corporate force that is invading to take this resource from them. Now, my suspicion is that our character is actually going to be a part of the extraterrestrial corporate forces, even though that's not exactly explained. But I think that that is going to be the case. We're part of like this force that is coming in to invade and take coral from the natives of Rubicon. Then they clarify that players thrust into the Rubicon war for coral. Coral is the core element of the story. This is where we get into my own speculation, but I think this part is pretty obvious. Coral is the core element of the story. Now, it's important to mention that our character this is information that we got from the trailer, by the way, our character is implanted with something that they call a cerebral coral control device. Now, if you think about this, coral was the catalyst for the cataclysmic event that took place in Rubicon. And if you look at some of the footage in the trailer, you'll notice that there's like a reddish hue to the skies, which is why you have like fires of Rubicon. So it's like coral caused this cataclysm, burned everything, fire cataclysm, fire in the skies. There's a reddish hue to it though, right? And then on top of it, some of the machines that you see in the trailer, they appear to be imbued with a reddish color. Not all of them, naturally not armored cores. Armored cores look perfectly normal. But like when you're talking about the bigger machines, which by the way, almost look like they are mining rigs. If you really take a close look at that trailer, a lot of these machines that are glowing red, they look like mining rigs. And those, it almost feels like Coral is responsible for corrupting these machines. It had some kind of a corrupting effect on them, and that's why we're being forced to fight these mining rigs, because mining rigs are not necessarily weapons, right? They're developed to mine the planet, and it makes sense because we were mining this place for coral. It almost sounds like one of those situations where, oh, the dwarves of old have dug too deep and they unearthed things that they didn't initially intend, right? And it makes sense, again, because like, oh, there was this cataclysmic reaction and whatnot. When did this cataclysm took place? 50 years ago, most likely when these mining rigs were mining for more and more coral and just trying to extract as much coral as possible. So maybe these machines were corrupted by coral by coming into direct contact with it. Could this be an indication that coral has some form of sentience? I don't know. And we're essentially using it as fuel, and like the moral implications of using something that has sentience just for energy. And then there's also the fact, how is this going to come into play with our character, who is implanted with a cerebral coral control device? Will we be getting corrupted by the coral? Will the mining rig somehow be able to access the coral that is in our brain and like do something? I don't know. These are just things that I was thinking about when it comes to the implications of coral in the story. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. I have a couple of more quotes here from Eurogamer. So in Eurogamer, we have another quote here. Armored Core 6 is not really supposed to be a story-driven game, but we feel like there's more of a drive to the narrative through the mission structure, and we hope that players, as they encounter these various factions and powers at play, that they're going to be thinking to themselves, what am I fighting for? What is my place in all of this? And how am I going to tackle these unfolding developments in the story, says Yamamura. Which again, almost seems to imply one of the things that I mentioned previously, with us potentially being a part of the extraterrestrial forces that are coming in to steal coral from the natives, and you know, and how that is going to mess with our head based on the cerebral control device. Basically, they're trying to get us to question all of this. This is one part that could be considered more direct storytelling, but also we feel like these fragmented elements of the story that the player is able to pick up and learn about the world and dive a little bit deeper into the lore, these elements are still present. The story will be a very indirect and almost cold depiction of human drama and conflict. Hence the focus on mech rather than human customization, says Yamamura. We hope that the player, whatever kind of player, however they identify, we want them to project themselves into that world and to become that pro-mercenary in this brand new setting of Rubicon. We hope that they enjoy that slightly more indirect and lonely aspect of the storytelling and the protagonist's role in the story. So in this aspect, you know, the focus of it is going to be more the action, all of that stuff, but naturally they're going to have that traditional storytelling that you kind of come to expect from software over the years. Then we also have something here from the PlayStation blog, which is perfecting your combat skills won't be the only reason you'll want to return to the front line. There will be multiple endings to Armored Core 6's narrative, with new paths opening up on subsequent playthroughs, giving players plenty of incentive to explore the world and story thoroughly. What will be the ultimate fate of Rubicon? That is all up to you. So the game is also going to have multiple endings, which is going to provide you with quite a bit of replay. Not to mention that you're already going to have plenty of replay just in terms of being able to customize your mech and doing all of that stuff. Now, just to finalize, and this is not necessarily about story, but, you know, fundamentally, I said earlier, the game is going to be mostly focused on single player. It will have, however, an online PvP mode where you'll be able to share builds with other people, and it's going to have some kind of like a community aspect to it in terms of PvP. So yeah, while the bulk of the game is going to be single player, the story is going to be single player, there will still be online PvP when you feel like you are ready to go ahead and tackle that stuff head on. But yeah, that is all of the things that I've seen so far about Armored Core 6. If I missed anything, let me know where I can find more information. I'll be happy to do another follow-up video. I'm also currently scheduling another Conscast, and I'm going to be talking with Fighting Cowboy Boy about a variety of things, and one of the things is naturally going to once again be Armored Core 6. So yeah, if there's any questions that you'd also like me to ask Cowboy about that, then feel free to leave those in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe for more content. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe. Peace out.